Hello, Manson students, and welcome to our next mindful lesson. Today we're talking about mindful listening and learning how to focus our brains on the sounds that are most important at that moment. Let's get started. You guys know I've talked previously about sensory input. Those are things, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, all of those different senses that we have, the things that are around us that come into our brains. That is sensory input. So any given day when you are sitting in your classroom, this is you here, let's pretend that you have all of these things going on around you while you're sitting in class. And it's not just these things too. It could be a whole bunch of other stuff that you only experience and I don't know about. So you have your teacher at the front of the class or around you who is teaching you about something important. This is what you should be focusing on, right? But you've also got maybe the birds outside making noise or the fan in the classroom heating the air. Maybe you have a loose tooth that's really bugging you and you've been playing with it. You might even be hungry, and that's a sensation that's kind of hard to ignore sometimes. Maybe your chair is really uncomfortable or squeaky, or maybe your friends are outside having fun and you're inside, or your friends next to you are making noise and talking and distracting you. What in the world are you supposed to do to control what your brain focuses on? How does your brain choose to focus on this, your teacher, rather than all of this other stuff going on? Well, that's what we're going to learn about. So we have a system in our brains called the RAS. We're just going to call it the RAS, but it has this big, long, fancy name called the Reticular Activating System. You don't have to remember that. Just call it the RAS. Our RAS is kind of like a secretary. You guys know Mrs. Kunkel in the office, right? She is our secretary for our school. She takes all the information that comes in from the outside of school, parent calls, newspapers, people at the district office giving us information. She takes all of that, decides what's important, and gets it to the right people. That is what your RAS does for your brain. It takes all of that information that you had coming in when you're sitting in the classroom, the bird noises, the fan, your tooth wiggling, your hunger, the uncomfortable chair, your teacher and your friends, sorts through all that and decides what's important at that time. Your teacher. Sometimes, though, our RAS doesn't know how to sort through all this yet. It doesn't know what's important at that time, and we have to practice and teach it what to focus on. Here's some examples of that. You can train your RAS to focus on certain things. Like an athlete practices and trains their RAS to only focus on things that are important during the game, like knowing where the soccer ball is, listening for the referee, paying attention to all of the other players on the field. That's what their RAS is looking for, and they've practiced focusing on just those things. So the RAS filters out everything else. Or maybe a musician playing in a band. They have trained their RAS to focus on looking at the music, listening to the other musicians, and watching the director of the band, the conductor. And the more you practice, the better your RAS is at focusing on what's important and filtering out everything else that is not important at that moment. Think about it. I want you guys to do a quick thought exercise for me. Just think about it in your brains or write it down if you want to, if you have something to write on. What are some situations, places, or times of the day when it's hard for you to pay attention? What do you think? What's different for you? What's hard? What times of day or places are hard for you to pay attention? Sometimes it's different for other people than it is for you. For me, it's hardest to pay attention in the morning if I haven't had my coffee and I'm feeling kind of sleepy. Oh goodness, it is hard to pay attention and focus on things at that moment. Or it could be hard for me to focus when I'm around a whole bunch of other people and they're making noise. Like if I am trying to get something done, get some reading done, and someone is trying to talk to me, or I'm in a really noisy area, that makes it really hard for me to focus. What about you guys? I'd love to hear what you have to say about those different times. So when you respond to this video, you can include that in your response. When that happens, when it's hard for you to focus, What do you think is happening in your brain? We've been learning a lot about our brain in the past few weeks, right? We've learned about the different parts of the brain. We learned about our prefrontal cortex, which is our wise leader. We learned about our hippocampus, our memory saver, and our amygdalas, our emotion centers and security guards. So what do you think is happening in your brain when it's hard for you to focus? Pause, write your answer down, or draw a picture. What are some situations, places, or times where it is most difficult for you to focus? Now we're going to do a quick listening exercise to practice paying attention to different things, just like an athlete or a musician would. In this case, we're going to be a musician, and we're going to listen for different pieces of the music. This is a song called Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies from the Nutcracker Suite, and it has different parts of music to it. You guys will hear there are at least 3 or 4 different instruments that play during this time. We are just going to pay attention to the main melody first. It'll be the sound of bells, and I'll point it out when it happens. Ready? We're going to listen to about 1 minute of it. Okay. In 1 minute, we were paying attention to the melody with the bells. And for the most part, it is the main part of that song. You can hear it over all of the other parts. So now we're going to challenge our brains to focus on a different part of the song. Did you guys hear the string instruments that started right at the beginning? This part. That part? Well, that happens through the whole song. Let's listen again and pay attention to just that string instrument. It's actually a violin that someone's plucking with their fingers. So I want you to listen closely and pay attention to just that part. See if it changes, gets louder, does something different. Just pay attention to the string instrument. Ready? Okay, it was harder that time, I think, for me to hear it underneath of the other pieces, but it changes the sound of the song, doesn't it? What do you think makes it different when you start focusing on that? What sounds different? Okay, now we're going to listen to one more part. See if I can find it. That one. The instrument that goes doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. That, I think, is an oboe. It's a woodwind instrument that you play like this with your mouth. So let's see if we can hear when it starts in the song. When it starts, I want you to raise your hand. Okay? So focus your raz on just that woodwind instrument. It doesn't start right at the beginning. Listen carefully. Okay. It's like a whole different song when you listen to those different parts. It's not just the melody anymore. There are so many different sounds and instruments playing at the same time. So, how did this type of listening help you enjoy the music? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this sound. If this is something that stood out to you, make sure you mark that or say something about it in your response to this video. Now let's pretend that the sounds that we were listening to, those different parts, were the voices of people that we talk to every day. Who do you think, whose voices do you listen to carefully and specifically at home? Whose voices do you pay attention to and hone in on at school? Who do you listen to the most and pay attention to in the songs of life? I know it's kind of a silly metaphor, but it works. Which one of those voices in the sound of your life do you focus on and listen to the most at school and at home? Yeah, that's something your Raz is doing. You're focusing in on those specific people and what they have to say at that moment, like we did just listen to the parts of that music piece. That was the end of part 1, friends. Come back next week for the next part.